Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Science After Hours. In this lecture we are going to discuss one of the major principles of the galaxy far, far away, the Force, its relationship to Midi-Chlorians and how that relates to endosymbiosis. Mustafarians call it the life current, the Chiss call it the sight, but we know it best as to what the Jedi call it, the Force, the mystical energy that binds the Star Wars galaxy together. But what is the Force? And are there examples of similar things that can be found right here on planet Earth? In the world of Star Wars, the Force has two aspects, and I don't mean the light and the dark, we will get to that a little bit later. I mean the cosmic force and the living force. The cosmic force is what binds all living things together, and it produces the living force, the energy of all life. The living force can be found in the most complex of beings like Jedi Master Yoda here, right the way down to the smallest little insect that lives underneath a rock. And when these beings die, their living force gets taken back into the cosmic force. It's a little bit like the water cycle, I suppose, in that rain starts in a cloud, falls down from the cloud, goes to wherever it is rain might go, and then that water will eventually find its way back up into the cloud. So much like here, the force starts in the cosmic force, it makes its way into the living force through some living organism, and then when this living organism dies, that returns once again to the larger pool that is the cosmic force. But this is not a video about the water cycle, it's not a video about physics, and I am most definitely not a physicist, so that's enough said on that for now. The origins of the Force remain unknown, but the idea of this cosmic energy that binds all things together dates back more than 25,000 years prior to the destruction of the first Death Star. Some believe that the Force originated from this ethereal realm of Mortis. Some believe it dates back prior to the formation of the Star Wars galaxy itself and played a hand in its creation and all living things in it. But as I say, nobody knows for sure. But people that do know are the Jedi Order. They have studied this thing for an extensive amount of time, and the wealth of knowledge that I'm going to pool down on here has come basically only from Jedi research. As anyone with even the most basic knowledge of Star Wars has, there are two interpretations of the Force and how to manipulate its energy. The light side, pictured here through the beautiful gaze of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the dark side and this evil stare of Darth Vader. Those who practice the light side of the Force are commonly known as Jedi, but that's not always the case, and this interpretation focuses on peace and passiveness and is primarily used for knowledge and defense, whereas the dark side, as one might imagine, is the polar opposite of this, focusing inward, harnessing power, emotion, mostly passion, hatred, anger. Basically, the former is selflessness, whereas the other is selfishness, doing things for greed and power. But what makes some individuals able to use the Force, like these two fine examples that we see here, and some, like your Jar Jar Binks, who is unable to use the Force? Well, the difference in those who are Force sensitive and those who are not can be found in Star Wars Episode 1, as a good friend of mine is about to tell us.
Master, sir, I heard Yoda talking about Midi-Chlorians. I've been wondering, what are Midi-Chlorians?
Midi-Chlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside yourselves, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage.
As Qui-Gon Jinn points out, all living things share a symbiotic relationship with a microscopic life form known as the Midi-Chlorian. and these can be found in the cells of all living organism. And the conventional wisdom is that the greater number of midi-chlorians found within an individual, the greater their connection to the force is. And after a significant threshold, some of those individuals are considered force sensitive. Midi-chlorians originate from this place, the wellspring of life, a planet found at the centre of the galaxy. Its location remained a legend, a mystery, until the previously pictured Jedi Master Yoda was able to find this location from instructions from the then deceased Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, who had become one with the cosmic force, but was still able to communicate with the living through it. Speaking of the cosmic force, its influence can be felt by these midi-chlorians that reside within us, and thus these intelligent microscopic organisms act as a bridge between both aspects of the force, the living force and the cosmic force. An average living being has around 2,500 midi-chlorians per cell, whilst a force-sensitive being is said to have around 4,000 or 5,000. Anakin Skywalker, the so-called Chosen One, was estimated to have over 20,000 midi-chlorians per cell in his blood, as determined by a relatively simple blood test conducted by the aforementioned Qui-Gon Jinn. Thus, ultimately, you could say that Qui-Gon performing this blood test on the young Skywalker, this blonde-haired fellow that we see here, did lead to the downfall of the Republic by this guy here and the thousands of deaths at the hands of Darth Vader, but that's a story for another time. In a galaxy that is very, very close, in the present day, there is a planet called Earth. Hopefully you are all very familiar with it. And on this planet are many, many, many symbiotic relationships. We are not going to talk about every single one because this video would be a lifetime's length, and nobody has a lifetime to watch a single YouTube video. But I am going to focus on one that I believe is more similar to that found between cells and midi-chlorians in the Star Wars galaxy, and one that is the origins of complex life that we have here on planet Earth. Cellular life on planet Earth comes in one of two flavours. Your prokaryotes, which make up your single-celled organisms, your bacteria and your archaea, and the eukaryotes, the more complicated sibling. And as you can clearly see, and I won't go into too much detail, these two cell types have very different structures. For example, even in shape you can see that they have very different structures, but if you look very closely you can see that some aspects of the eukaryotic or the animal cell, the cell that makes up us and all creatures and plants too, but not your single-celled bacteria or archaea or amoeba or anything like that, but you can see that some aspects of the eukaryotic cell, namely the mitochondria, which I am circling here, do somewhat resemble the structure of the prokaryote, and that might suggest that the origins of the eukaryote do somewhat originate from the prokaryote, and we are going to discuss this evolution from one to the other for the rest of this lecture. There are multiple theories as to how the eukaryotic cell was made, and we are not going to look at every single one of them. We're going to look at the ones that I find the most interesting. We're going to focus on three key differences between them. The mitochondria, eukaryotes have them, prokaryotes don't. The nucleus, eukaryotes have them, prokaryotes don't. And the inner cellular membranes, of which again eukaryotes have and prokaryotes don't. So we're going to start with the mitochondria because that is the cellular organelle, or the organs within the cell, that has the most well understood and defined origin. This bacteria here is Paracoccus dendrificans, and of all the bacteria studied in the modern world, it is thought that this bacteria shares the greatest similarity between bacteria and the mitochondria that we possess in all of our cells. And one of the biochemical reasons for this is the oxidative transport chain. The electron transport chain, oxidative phosphorylation. It's all the same to me. So this here is the electron transport chain found within Paracoccus. And this here is the electron transport chain found within the modern day eukaryotic cell. And you can see just visually that there are some vast similarities, and they both ultimately produce ATP, which is sort of the energy currency that cells and thus life on planet Earth uses. A strong piece of evidence that suggests that the initial pre-prokaryote amoeboid-like cell engulfed one of these ancestral relatives of this Paracoccus here, and then that internalized Paracoccus became biochemically linked to the pre-eukaryote. Over time, their biochemical pathways became dependent on one another. The bacteria was able to keep pace with cellular division, thus allowing all future generations of that now sort of proto-eukaryotic cell or future generations of it to also have a Paracoccus within them, until over time this Paracoccus, it lost its sort of self-sufficientness. It was no longer a self-sufficient Paracoccus. It was sort of the precursor to the mitochondria that we have today. And the structure of the mitochondria tells us that it was indeed some form of cell eating another cell, because the outer membrane of the mitochondria resembles the outer membrane, which can be sort of shown here in this figure, of the eukaryotic cell, whereas the inner membrane of the mitochondria is more closely resembled to that of a prokaryote. So if you've got your initial prokaryote, this Paracoccus, and it is engulfed by a eukaryote, those are two membranes there, a eukaryotic membrane on the outside and this Paracoccus membrane on the inside, and thus the relics of this interaction can still be found within the mitochondria. The timeline of the nucleus, however, and whether it formed before or after the mitochondria is currently unknown, but there is the impact of the formation of the nucleus on cellular life is incalculable, and there are many hypotheses for how the nucleus was formed, and as I say, we're only going to talk about a few here today. So one hypothesis suggests that the nucleus was formed in a similar way to the mitochondria. Evidence for this is that our genome has been studied a lot, and there is both bacterial and archaeal, they're both prokaryotic species, remember, that our genome has similarities to both of those, suggesting that many eons ago that a bacterial genome and an archaeal genome came together. So I've tried to sort of show that here. You have your sort of pre-eukaryotic cell here with its nucleoid, non-nucleus, amorphous genome here, and we have another bacteria here, again with a nucleoid-based genome, and this bacteria is going to become engulfed by this archaea, this pre-eukaryotic cell, and over time, biochemically, the two species become interlinked, their DNA becomes intertwined, there's a lot of condensation, and the chromosomes are formed, and that is how we end up with the nucleus that we have in our cells today. But there is a strong piece of evidence that suggests that that's not the case, and it's the same piece of evidence that proves that the mitochondria was formed from this theory, and it's the structure of the membranes. Remember, the mitochondria has that inner and outer membrane that resemble the prokaryote and the eukaryote. Well, the nucleus doesn't have a membrane structure like that. In fact, it has a membrane that has pores in it, significant gaps, as you can see in this figure here. There's one here, one here, one here, and this sort of membrane structure wouldn't have come from a typical phagocytosis relationship. So again, whilst this is a hypothesis and this could have happened, nobody was there, it is unlikely. An equally unlikely hypothesis is that the pre-eukaryotic cell, whether it already had a mitochondria or not at this point, divided, and then one of them proceeded to engulf the other cell, and then the nucleus formed from that engulfed cell. So again, I have tried to show it here, where one of these cells is going to eat the other cell, and then this cell, say, will end up becoming the nucleus. This will allow us to have a membrane structure that is closer to the nuclear membrane that we see today. Again, the pores do represent a little bit of an issue, but a more important issue is that prokaryotes today have not shown the capacity to incorporate an entire other prokaryote into its genome. Again, that's not to say that it didn't happen eons ago. These are just hypotheses after all, but as I say, it is unlikely. So this last theory I'm going to show is the one that I like the most. I think is the most believable, if that's the correct term to use, and hopefully you will think it too. And it ties the formation of the mitochondria, the nucleus, and that inner cellular membrane all together into one large endosymbiotic journey. So you have your pre-eukaryotic cell. That this particular cell is the one that is going to be the formation of the nucleus, and then this bacterial cell here is going to be the future mitochondria. So this pre-eukaryote is going to extend out its membrane to begin encroaching onto the sort of proto-mitochondria, this bacterium here. And as these membranes enlarge and extend and inevitably engulf the proto-mitochondrial bacteria that we see here in part C of this figure, pores, gaps are left in the original cell membrane. So you can see here that there is a complete cell membrane around this cell here that goes on to become the future nucleus. And as these growths sprout out from this central cell, you can see that the membrane is now broken. And over time, as the cell grows and enlarges and incorporates these bacterium that then become mitochondria, these gaps in the membrane are never fully resealed, thus allowing the creation of the nuclear pores that we see in the modern day nucleus. These extensions from the original cell then go on to become part of the intracellular membrane network that makes up the endoplasmic reticulum. And as these biochemical pathways are all interlinked between the now engulfed bacteria, the pre-mitochondria, and the newly formed inner cellular membrane of the cell, the DNA begins to interact, and much like those other hypotheses, the interaction over millions and millions of years causes the condensation of this DNA into the separation into separate chromosomes, and thus forming what is considered the normal nucleus today. So it accounts for the explanation of the two prokaryotic genomes. If you consider that if this is perhaps an archaeal species and this is a bacterial species, as their DNA intertwines, it becomes one genome. The genome that we have today, within reason of course, we've evolved a fair bit from a single-celled organism. It accounts for the membrane pores, it allows for the construction of inner cellular membrane, and thus I think this is the most believable hypothesis presented thus far. So in conclusion, the mitochondria and the eukaryotic cell are remarkably similar. There are many endosymbiotic relationships both here and in a galaxy far, far away. And if you think I've gone completely mad and insane, worry not. George Lucas himself has confirmed that midi-chlorians were based off of the mitochondria that reside in eukaryotic cells, and thus that eukaryotic relationship, historical relationship that I briefly touched on. So, I'm okay, and hopefully you're okay too, having learned something about a galaxy far, far away and planet Earth right here. Thank you for watching.